10 years. 10 years of marriage. 10 years believing she was living a fairy tale. Sarah never imagined that, on the night of her 10th wedding anniversary, her husband Michael would look her in the eye and say the most destructive words she would ever hear. "You've disgusted me since our first night." But the truth behind that sentence was even more shocking than she could have imagined. What Sarah discovered changed everything. And what happened next? Well, you need to hear it all the way through. There are people who live a lie without knowing it. They wake up every day next to someone who never truly loved them. Sarah was 36 when she discovered her entire life was a carefully constructed illusion. She was the kind of woman everyone admired. Beautiful, educated, always elegant at social events. The perfect wife. But perfect for whom? For the husband she claimed to love? Or for his career? Sometimes people marry for love. Other times, for self-interest. And when someone discovers they were just a pawn in a game they never knew they were playing, the ground disappears from under them. This is Sarah's story. A story of betrayal, manipulation, but also of rebirth. Because sometimes, the greatest strength comes from the greatest pain. Before we continue, tell me, what city and country are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're from. The evening of March 15th began as Sarah had always dreamed. 10 years of marriage deserved a special celebration. She spent hours getting ready, choosing the navy blue dress Michael once said he loved about her, and reserving a table at Riverside, the restaurant where he proposed. Every detail was carefully thought out. Every moment was lovingly planned. Sarah looked in the mirror one last time before leaving the house. At 36, she still had the same beauty that had made Michael fall in love, or so she believed. Her brown hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. Her green eyes sparkled with anticipation. She smiled to herself. 10 years. A whole decade with the man she loved. The restaurant was beautifully lit when she arrived. Michael was already there, sitting at the same table he'd been at 10 years ago. He wore a dark gray suit, looking as elegant as ever. But something in his eyes was different. Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe fatigue, maybe work stress. Michael was a partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. His work was always intense. "Hi, love," Sarah said, kissing his cheek before sitting down. "Hi," Michael replied, without looking up from the menu. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, but ignored it. It was their wedding anniversary. She wasn't going to let anything ruin that night. The waiter came, took their order, and quickly brought a bottle of red wine. Sarah raised her glass. 10 years, Michael. I can't believe it's been that long." Michael looked at her. There was something cold in his gaze, something Sarah had never seen before. He took the glass but didn't toast. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said. Her heart raced. Those words never brought anything good. She set the glass back down, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. "Talk about what?" Michael took a sip of wine. He took a deep breath, and then he said the words that completely destroyed Sarah. "You've disgusted me since our first night." The restaurant didn't stop. People continued talking. The waiters continued serving. The music continued playing. But Sarah's world stopped completely. She blinked several times, trying to process what she had just heard. "What?" was all he could say. "You heard me," Michael said, his voice cold and calculated. "I never felt anything for you, Sarah. Never." Tears began to burn in her eyes. Her throat closed. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Michael continued, each sentence a deeper stab. These 10 years were a lie, every kiss, every "I love you," every promise. All a lie? "Why?" Sarah finally managed to whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Michael leaned back in his chair, as if relieved to finally have that weight off his shoulders. "Because I don't have to pretend anymore," he said simply. Sarah felt nauseous. The restaurant began to spin around her. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. People at the surrounding tables began to stare. She didn't care. Her world was falling apart. "Don't you have to pretend anymore?" she repeated, her voice breaking. Michael, we've had 10 years together. We've had a life together. We have a farce, he interrupted. A farce I've created quite well, I must admit. Sarah rose from her chair, her legs shaking. She needed to get out of there. She needed to breathe. She needed to understand what was happening. But Michael grabbed her wrist. "Sit down," he ordered. I'm not finished yet." She sat down, not out of obedience, but because her legs could no longer support her. Michael released her wrist and continued with the same coldness. "I married you because I had to. Simple as that. You were perfect for the role. Beautiful, educated, from a good family. Exactly what I needed to get the partnership at the firm, and it worked perfectly." Every word was a blow. Sarah felt as if she were being stabbed repeatedly. 10 years. 10 years of her life given to a man who never loved her. 10 years believing a lie. "You're kidding," she said, even though she knew he wasn't. "This can't be real." Michael gave a cruel smile. "It's very real, Sarah. And now that I have everything I need, I see no reason to continue this charade." Sarah wiped away the tears that were streaming freely down her face. She looked at the man in front of her, the man she'd shared a decade with, the man she'd sworn to love in sickness and in health, the man who was now a complete stranger. "I loved you," she said, her voice hoarse. "I loved you with every part of me." "I know," Michael replied, without emotion. "And that's exactly what made it so easy." Sarah stood up again, this time with determination. She grabbed her bag, wiped her face one last time, and looked at Michael. "It won't stay like this," she said. And then she left the restaurant, leaving behind not only her husband, but also the naive woman she once was. Think about this for a second. How many times do we ignore signs because we want to believe in a reality that doesn't exist? Sarah spent 10 years building a life that was never real. And now she needed to discover who she really was without the identity of Michael's wife. So, tell me, what advice would you give to someone who just discovered they've been living a lie? Leave a comment. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video here. Subscribe to our channel using the subscribe button or the QR code that appears on your screen, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this. Sarah drove through the streets of Chicago with no destination in sight. The city lights blurred past her tears. She couldn't stop crying. She couldn't stop thinking. How did it all get here? When did the lie begin? Her mind went back to the beginning, to the day she met Michael. It was spring 2015. Sarah was 26 and working as a marketing manager at a tech company. She was at a corporate event in downtown Chicago, one of those boring events where everyone pretends to be interested in networking. Sarah was ready to leave when he showed up. Michael was 30 years old, recently promoted to senior counsel at a respected firm. He was handsome, confident, and charismatic. He wore a navy blue suit that accentuated his light eyes. When he smiled at her from across the room, Sarah felt butterflies in her stomach. He walked toward her with a glass of wine in his hand. "You look as bored as I feel," he said, his smile charming. Sarah laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Absolutely," Michael replied. "How about we get out of here and get some real coffee?" And that's how it began. Sarah didn't know the invitation was calculated. She didn't know Michael had spent weeks researching her, checking out her family, her education, her social standing. For Sarah, it was love at first sight. For Michael, it was pure strategy. They started dating. Michael was the perfect boyfriend. He sent flowers to work. He called every day. He planned romantic dates. Sarah fell head over heels. She introduced Michael to her parents on Long Island. They loved him. Michael knew exactly what to say, how to act, and what impression to make. "That boy will go far," her father said after dinner. "And he clearly loves you, Sarah." Sarah smiled, holding Michael's hand. She believed it. She believed every word, every gesture, every promise. 6 months later, Michael was promoted again at the firm. Sarah was so proud of him, she made a special dinner to celebrate. "You're amazing, you know that." Michael said that night, kissing her forehead. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah felt her heart melt. She didn't know the compliment had a purpose. Michael needed her firmly by his side. He needed the image of a committed and stable man. A year passed. Michael met the firm's partners. They were traditional and conservative men. They valued family, stability, and commitment. "Do you have a girlfriend, Michael?" one of the partners asked during lunch. "Yes, I do," Michael replied. "Sarah. We've been together for over a year." "Really? When are we going to meet her?" Michael knew this was the moment. He organized a dinner and took Sarah to meet the partners and their wives. Sarah was nervous, but Michael reassured her. "Just be yourself," he said. "They'll love you." And they loved it. Sarah was charming, polite, and beautiful. She talked about art, literature, and travel. She asked intelligent questions. She laughed at the right moments. It was perfect, exactly as Michael had planned. On the way home, he held her hand. "You were amazing today," he said. "They're really nice," Sarah replied, "but I was so nervous." "You didn't have to be. You're perfect." Perfect. That word echoed in Sarah's mind years later, in the car, crying alone. She wasn't perfect. She was convenient. 3 months after that dinner, Michael proposed. It was at Riverside, Sarah's favorite restaurant. He had a blue Tiffany box, a beautiful diamond ring. He got down on one knee in front of everyone. "Sarah, you're the love of my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Sarah cried with happiness. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." The people in the restaurant applauded. Sarah was over the moon. She called her mother immediately. She called her friends. She posted photos on social media. Everyone commented on what a perfect couple they were, how they were made for each other. The wedding was 6 months later. It was exactly as Sarah had dreamed. A beautiful white dress, flowers everywhere, everyone she loved in attendance. Michael looked impeccable in his tuxedo. When they exchanged their vows, Sarah cried. Michael also had tears in his eyes. She thought they were tears of joy. She didn't know they were tears of relief, relief that the plan was working. "I promise to love you forever," Michael said during the vows. "And I promise to be your best friend, your partner, your love," Sarah replied. Their honeymoon was in Hawaii. 2 weeks of beaches, romantic dinners, and boat trips. Sarah was completely happy. She finally had everything she'd ever wanted. A wonderful husband, a bright future, true love, or so she thought. Back in Chicago, they set up home together. Sarah lovingly decorated every room. Michael worked more and more. The firm was considering making him a partner. Sarah supported everything. She attended every corporate event. She smiled at every client. She was the perfect wife. Exactly what Michael needed. Now, driving through the empty streets, Sarah noticed all the signs she'd ignored. The times Michael seemed distant, the moments he avoided intimacy, the occasions when he was clearly faking it. But she was so in love, so blind, that she didn't see it, didn't want to see it. How could she have been so naive? How could she have let 10 years pass without realizing she was living a lie? Sarah finally arrived home at 2 in the morning. The house was dark and silent. Michael wasn't there. She didn't know where he went after the restaurant, and frankly, she didn't care. She went upstairs, took off the blue dress she'd chosen so lovingly, and put on a pair of old pajamas. She sat on the bed and looked around. This room, this house, this whole life suddenly seemed strange, as if it belonged to someone else. Her mind flashed back to her honeymoon. Hawaii had been beautiful. White sand beaches, crystal blue water, breathtaking sunsets. Sarah remembered their first day there. They stayed at a luxury resort in Maui. Michael booked an ocean view suite, tropical flowers, decorated the room. Champagne waited in an ice bucket. Everything seemed perfect, like a dream come true. "I'm so happy," Sarah said that first night, lying next to him in the king-size bed. "We're finally husband and wife." We've finally started our life together. Michael smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reached his eyes. Sarah didn't notice it at the time. She was blinded by happiness. He didn't say anything in response. He just continued staring at the ceiling. Sarah thought he was tired from the long trip. She moved closer to him, kissed his neck gently, and ran her hand over his chest. Michael pulled away almost imperceptibly. "I'm exhausted, love," he said, rolling over onto his side. "Shall we go to sleep? We have the whole day ahead of us tomorrow." Sarah was slightly disappointed, but she understood. Or at least she tried to. It had been an incredibly long day. The wedding, the reception, the flight to Hawaii. It was natural to be tired. The next day, they woke up early and strolled along the beach. The sand was warm beneath their feet. The waves lapped gently against the shore. Michael took several photos of Sarah. She posed smiling, her white dress billowing in the wind. She took photos of him, too. He looked handsome in the light blue shirt and sunglasses. They posted the photos on social media immediately. The comments poured in quickly. "The most beautiful couple. You two are perfect together. I'm so jealous." Sarah read each comment with a smile on her face. Michael just glanced at them and put his phone away. Sarah believed all those comments were true. Michael knew he was just performing for the right audience. The days in Hawaii passed in a pleasant routine. Breakfast at the resort, sightseeing during the day, romantic dinners at night. They visited hidden waterfalls, snorkeled in coral reefs, and watched Hawaiian dance performances. Sarah was enchanted by everything. She held Michael's hand, kissed his cheek, and told him how much she loved him at every opportunity. Michael responded just right. Not too much, so as not to seem insincere, not too little, so as not to arouse suspicion. He had calculated exactly how much affection to show, how much involvement to feign. It was like following a script he'd written himself. But whenever Sarah tried to deepen the intimacy between them, whenever she sought real physical connection, Michael found a perfect excuse. "I have a headache. I ate too much at dinner. Let's just enjoy this incredible sunset. I'm sunburned." Every excuse was plausible. Every rejection was disguised as care. Sarah began to feel inadequate, but she couldn't pinpoint why. After all, he was there with her. He smiled. He took pictures. He said kind words. What more could she want? "Michael, is something wrong?" she finally asked one night as they ate dinner at a seaside restaurant. "Wrong? Of course not, love," Michael replied, taking her hand across the table. "Why do you ask that?" "I don't know. I just feel like you're distant." Michael squeezed her hand with just the right amount of pressure. Not too hard, not too soft. "Sarah, I'm just completely relaxing for the first time in years. You know how stressful work has been. I'm finally able to slow down. Don't take this as distance. It's just peace." Sarah accepted the explanation. It made sense, didn't it? Michael worked so hard. He deserved to relax. She smiled and changed the subject. She always changed the subject when something bothered her. It was easier than confronting, safer than questioning. When they returned to Chicago after 2 weeks, life continued as usual. Michael threw himself into work with renewed intensity. He came home late and left early. Weekends were dedicated to preparing important cases. Sarah began planning what their life would be like in the years to come. She wanted children, at least 2. She wanted a family. She wanted to make memories. She wanted to build something real and lasting. But whenever he brought it up, whenever he brought up the possibility of expanding his family, Michael had the same rehearsed response. "Let's wait a little longer," he said, without even looking up from his laptop. "I want to be more stable in my career first. I want to make sure we can give our children everything they deserve. It's all about timing." Sarah agreed because it seemed reasonable, because it seemed responsible, because Michael always sounded so logical, so practical. She wanted him to feel safe and prepared. She wanted to support him in every decision, so she waited and waited and kept waiting. The first year of marriage passed in the blink of an eye. Sarah remembered every detail, every moment she believed was special. Michael was promoted again 3 months after their honeymoon. He was now a full-fledged attorney, with a significantly higher salary and even greater responsibilities. Sarah was beaming with pride. Her husband was brilliant, dedicated, ambitious, everything she admired in a man. She hosted a celebratory party at home. She spent days planning every detail. She hired a caterer, decorated the living room with understated elegance, and created the perfect playlist. She invited Michael's co-workers, the firm's partners, the couple's friends, and some family. The house was filled with well-dressed guests, lively conversation, and laughter. Sarah walked the party floor, wearing an elegant red dress she'd bought especially for the occasion. She chatted with everyone, made sure the glasses were always full, the appetizers were constantly circulating, and everyone felt welcome. "Your wife is absolutely wonderful," one of the senior partners said to Michael, watching Sarah interact graciously with the guests. "You are a very lucky man, Michael." "I know," Michael replied, putting his arm around Sarah's waist as she approached. "She's amazing. I don't know what I'd do without her." Sarah felt her heart warm at those words. She leaned against him, feeling loved and valued. She didn't realize that Michael was simply maintaining the image he needed to project, the image of the successful man with the perfect wife, the image that would open doors for him at the firm, the image that would guarantee his advancement. The second year of marriage brought subtle changes that Sarah began to notice. Michael arrived home later and later, some nights at 9, others at 10, and sometimes even 11. He spent entire weekends at the office, citing urgent cases, tight deadlines, and demanding clients. When he was home, he was always glued to his laptop or phone. His attention was always divided, always elsewhere. Sarah tried to be the understanding wife every woman should be. "Honey, you need to rest," she said one Friday night when he got home at 10 and went straight to his home office. "You're working too much. It's not healthy." "I know, Sarah," Michael replied, not even turning to look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the computer screen. "But this is an important step. I'm being considered for junior partner. I need to prove myself. And when you become a partner, will everything improve? Will we have more time together?" "Yes," he said automatically. "I promise. As soon as this is over, we'll travel. We'll spend more time together. We'll focus on us." Another empty promise. Another well-constructed lie. But Sarah believed because she wanted to believe, because the alternative was facing a truth she wasn't yet ready to see. She remained the perfect wife. She cooked special dinners that Michael barely touched, eating absent-mindedly while checking emails on his phone. She planned romantic weekends that he canceled at the last minute because of work emergencies. She tried to start deep conversations about the future, about children, about dreams, but he always found a way to quickly end them and get back to work. Sarah began to fill the void in other ways. She joined a book club. She started yoga classes. She volunteered at a local charity. She had lunch with friends regularly. She kept herself busy so she wouldn't think too much about the loneliness she was beginning to feel within her own marriage. But she always found excuses for Michael's behavior. It was work, it was stress, it was a temporary phase. Every marriage goes through rough patches, she told herself. The third year brought the news Sarah had been waiting for. Michael became a junior partner at the firm at 33. He was one of the youngest partners in the firm's history, an impressive achievement. Sarah was bursting with pride. She organized another celebration party, even larger and more elaborate than the last. This time, she rented an elegant hall in downtown Chicago. She hired the best vendors. She chose every detail with meticulous care. The party was an absolute success. Michael addressed the more than 100 guests in attendance, thanking his mentors, colleagues, and clients. And then, he made a point of publicly thanking his wife. "None of this would be possible without Sarah," he said, his voice firm and emotional, gesturing to her through the crowd. "She is my rock, my inspiration, my partner in everything. I am grateful every day to have such an incredible woman by my side." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Sarah felt tears of emotion in her eyes. Some friends beside her squeezed her hand, whispering how lucky she was. How perfect they were. Sarah believed every word Michael said. She didn't know that each word was carefully chosen for the audience, for the image, for the performance. She thought that finally, things would get better between them. Now that Michael had reached this important career milestone, he could relax a little. They could focus on their marriage. They could start thinking seriously about having children. They could build the family Sarah so desperately wanted. But it didn't get better. In fact, it got worse. Michael remained distant, perhaps even more so than before. Physical intimacy between them was practically non-existent. They shared the same bed, but weeks could go by without any real contact. Sarah began to question herself deeply. Was it her? Was something wrong with her? Was she no longer attractive? Had she gained weight? Was she dressing poorly? Was she not taking care of her appearance? She began observing other women. She constantly compared herself. She began a strict diet even though she was already thin. She changed her haircut. She completely overhauled her wardrobe. She bought expensive lingerie that was never noticed. She did everything she could to make herself more desirable, more interesting, more worthy of attention. But nothing changed. Michael remained cold, distant, indifferent. "Michael, can we talk about us?" She tried one night, mustering all the courage she had. "About what, exactly?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the laptop screen. "About our relationship. I feel like we're living like roommates, not husband and wife. We're not intimate anymore. We barely talk." Michael sighed deeply, as if this conversation were a huge inconvenience in his busy schedule. "Sarah, I'm tired of this conversation. I work 12 hours a day to give you this comfortable life. This beautiful house, these designer clothes, these international trips. It all costs a lot of money. Someone has to pay the bills." "I'm not complaining about the money," Sarah said, frustration beginning to creep into her voice. "I'm talking about connection, about presence, about attention. And I'm talking about responsibility," Michael replied, his voice rising slightly. "About priorities, about adulthood. I can't sit here talking about feelings when I have deadlines to meet." Sarah backed away immediately. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to be seen as the annoying, insecure, needy wife who complained about everything. So she swallowed her worries once more. She apologized for bothering him. She returned to her side of the bed and pretended to sleep as tears silently streamed down her face. The following years followed the same painful pattern. Sarah trying to connect, Michael systematically pulling away, Sarah constantly questioning herself, Michael constantly blaming work, Sarah adapting to each rejection, Michael benefiting from each adaptation. It was a vicious cycle Sarah couldn't break, because breaking would mean admitting something was deeply, irretrievably wrong. And she simply wasn't ready to face that devastating truth. The fourth year brought more professional achievements for Michael. He closed important cases that generated headlines in Chicago newspapers. His reputation in the legal community grew exponentially. Sarah watched from afar, always present at important events, always smiling beside him in photos, always the supportive and proud wife. But at home, the distance between them became an ever-widening and deepening chasm. Sarah began to notice patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. The way Michael avoided looking directly at her during conversations. The way his body stiffened when she casually touched him. The way he always had a ready excuse to avoid attending her family events. The way he never initiated conversations about their future. The way he changed the subject whenever she mentioned children. Every little detail began to accumulate in her mind, like pieces of a puzzle she was afraid to put together. She tried to talk to her friends about it. But how could she explain something so subtle? How could she put into words what it felt like to be married to someone who didn't really see her? Her friends said well-intentioned but unhelpful things. Every marriage goes through rough patches. Men are like that, focused on work. At least he's faithful and successful. You're lucky, Sarah. Look at the life he gives you. Sarah listened and agreed, because it was easier. Because questioning meant opening a box she wasn't sure she could close again. So she kept pretending. She kept smiling. She kept being the perfect wife everyone admired, the wife who had everything, the wife who shouldn't complain about anything at all. The 5th year was marked by Sarah's desperate attempt to save her marriage. She suggested couples therapy. Michael immediately refused, saying they didn't need strangers interfering in their private lives. She suggested a second honeymoon. Michael said he couldn't take that long off work. She suggested weekly dates, just the two of them, without distractions. Michael agreed, but canceled them all. There was always an emergency. There was always something more important. There was always a perfectly reasonable excuse. Sarah began to feel invisible in her own home. She prepared Michael's favorite breakfast. He ate absent-mindedly, reading the newspaper. She asked about his day. He responded in monosyllables. She tried to share stories about hers. He pretended to pay attention, but was clearly elsewhere mentally. It was like living with a ghost. Or worse, it was like being the ghost. 6th grade brought a moment that should have been a huge wake-up call. Sarah discovered she was pregnant. It was an accident, as Michael always avoided intimacy. But it happened. Sarah was terrified, but also hopeful. Maybe a baby would change everything. Maybe Michael would finally connect with her. Maybe they would become a real family. She carefully planned how to tell him. She made a special dinner. She put the pregnancy test in a little gift box. She waited for the perfect moment. When Michael came home that night, she was nervous but excited. "I have a surprise for you," she said, handing over the little box. Michael opened it without much interest. He looked at the pregnancy test. His expression didn't change. No joy, no emotion, no reaction. Just a blank, cold stare that made Sarah's heart sink. "What now?" was all he said. "We're expecting a baby, Michael," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone cheerful despite his reaction. "We're going to be parents. Isn't that wonderful?" "Wonderful," he repeated, his voice flat. "That complicates things. I'm in the middle of an important case. I can't afford to be distracted right now." Distract. He used the word distract to describe their son. Sarah felt nauseous, but she couldn't tell if it was from the pregnancy or his reaction. She tried to hug him. He pulled away. "I need to work," he said, heading straight to his home office. Sarah stood alone in the kitchen, holding the pregnancy test, tears streaming silently down her face. She should have seen it as the sign it was. She should have realized that Michael would never change, that he was incapable of love. But she still had hope. She still believed that when the baby was born, everything would be different. 3 weeks later, Sarah lost the baby. It was a miscarriage early in her pregnancy. She was devastated. She spent days in bed, crying, processing the loss. Michael barely noticed. He continued his routine as normal. Work, home, work, no comfort, no empathy, no emotional support. "You'll be fine," was all he said. "It happens to a lot of women. It's normal." Normal. As if her pain were insignificant. As if the loss didn't matter. Sarah realized in that moment that she was completely alone in her marriage. But she wasn't ready to leave yet. She didn't have the courage yet. She was still afraid of what would come next. The following years blurred into a haze of lifeless routine. 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. Sarah aged not only physically but emotionally. The light in her eyes gradually dimmed. Her smile became automatic, devoid of real feeling. She became a ghost version of her former self. The vibrant woman Michael knew was gone, replaced by an empty shell who merely performed the duties of a wife. And then the 10th year arrived, their 10th wedding anniversary. Sarah still had a glimmer of hope. Maybe on this momentous date, Michael would finally show something. Some feeling, some remorse, some humanity. She was so wrong. Sarah spent the entire night awake, lying in her empty bed, staring at the ceiling. Michael's words echoed in her mind over and over. "You've disgusted me since our first night." Every time she remembered, she felt a physical pain in her chest, as if someone were squeezing her heart with brutal, unrelenting force. When the first rays of sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, Sarah was still in the same position. Her eyes were dry now. She had no more tears to cry. She had cried so much during the night that her eyes felt like they were burning. She rose from the bed mechanically, as if controlled by invisible strings. She went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The woman she saw reflected back was a complete stranger. Her eyes were red and swollen, as if she'd been beaten. Her face was pale, as if all the blood had been drained from her. Her disheveled hair fell over her shoulders. She barely recognized herself in that pathetic image. Sarah walked slowly down the stairs, holding onto the railing like an elderly person who'd lost all strength. Each step felt like an impossible mountain to climb. She reached the kitchen and tried to make coffee, but her hands were shaking so badly she spilled the beans on the floor. The sound of the beans scattering across the tile floor was like a gunshot in the morning silence. She knelt to clean it up and suddenly began to cry again. Deep, primal sobs that welled up from the depths of her wounded soul. There, on the cold kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered coffee grounds, Sarah finally allowed all the pent-up pain to pour out unfiltered. How long did she remain in that humiliating position? She didn't know. It could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. Time had lost all meaning. When she finally managed to stand, leaning against the counter, she wiped her face with trembling hands and finished making the coffee. The strong aroma filled the kitchen, bringing a strange sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. She sat at the table where she had had coffee with Michael so many mornings, where they had talked about trivial plans for the day, where they had pretended to be a happy, loving couple. His chair was empty. Everything felt eerily empty now. Sarah picked up the phone she'd left on the table the night before and saw several messages from friends that had started arriving early. "How was your birthday dinner? Where are the pictures from the restaurant? I bet Michael got you an amazing gift. Tell me everything." Each innocent, well-meaning message was a knife to her already shattered heart. How could she respond? What could she say? That she'd discovered her entire marriage was an elaborate and cruel sham. That the man she'd loved passionately for 10 years had never felt anything for her at all. That she'd been used as a disposable tool. She turned off the phone without responding and put it on silent. The day passed in a thick, suffocating haze. Sarah sat on the living room couch, completely still, staring at the walls she'd painted herself, at the framed wedding photos that looked so happy and romantic, at the decorative paintings she'd lovingly selected from antique shops, at every small object that made the house a welcoming home. Or so she naively believed. Now everything seemed completely fake and artificial. Every photo was a lie, carefully captured and framed in time. Every happy memory was irretrievably tainted by the horrible truth. She began to replay the 10 years obsessively in her mind, not nostalgically and romantically, as she had in the previous night's car ride, but with a critical, painful, and relentless gaze. How many clear signs had she deliberately ignored? How many times had Michael shown obvious coldness, and she pathetically excused it as work fatigue? How many painful rejections had she swallowed silently to keep the peace? How many times had he avoided physical intimacy, and she had accepted his apologies without question? The signs had always been there, screaming in her face. She had simply consciously chosen not to see them because the truth was too frightening. The idyllic honeymoon in Hawaii. Michael systematically pulling away every time she sought closeness and connection. The difficult early years when he worked late every day without exception. The endless social events where he was affectionate and attentive only in front of colleagues and business associates. The unexpected pregnancy he greeted with complete indifference and even annoyance. The devastating miscarriage he dismissed as a minor and insignificant inconvenience. Every carefully guarded memory now had a new meaning. A dark, cruel, and destructive meaning. Sarah got up from the couch after hours and began pacing the house like a lost soul. She entered Michael's sacred home office. She looked at the perfectly organized desk, the thick law books on the mahogany shelves, the expensive diplomas framed strategically on the wall, Everything in that meticulously curated space was about his brilliant career. There wasn't a single photo of the two of them smiling together. Not a single memento, even remotely personal or sentimental. It was as if she simply didn't exist in that crucial part of his life, and perhaps she never truly existed. She carefully opened the heavy drawers of the wooden desk. I wasn't sure exactly what I was desperately searching for. Maybe concrete evidence. Maybe answers that made sense. Maybe something revealing that rationally explained how a normal human being could be so calculating, manipulative, and completely cold. He found only boring office documents, complicated contracts, technical notes from complex cases, nothing personal or revealing, nothing that revealed who Michael really was behind the impeccable, seductive mask. Sarah slammed the drawers shut and left the office feeling even more lost. She went to the bedroom they had shared for a decade. She opened Michael's enormous closet. All his expensive clothes were perfectly organized by style and color. Imported suits hung in obsessive order. Designer shirts impeccably pressed and starched. Italian shoes gleaming with polish. Everything was rigidly controlled. Everything was pure, calculated imagery. She picked up one of the suits and felt the soft, expensive fabric between her fingers. How many countless times had she helped Michael choose the perfect tie? How many times had she sincerely complimented how elegant and attractive he looked? She was merely dressing an empty puppet, creating the perfect social appearance for a man emotionally dead inside. The phone rang loudly, abruptly interrupting Sarah's dark thoughts. It was her mother calling for the third time that day. Sarah stared at the brightly lit screen, but couldn't answer. How could she talk to her mother now in this state? How would she explain in detail that the perfect son-in-law, the man the entire family adored and constantly praised, was a complete and meticulously constructed fraud? She let the call go straight to voicemail and put the phone back in her pocket. The long afternoon slowly faded into night. Sarah hadn't eaten a thing all day. She felt neither hungry nor tempted to eat. She had no energy or motivation to do anything at all. She simply existed in that empty space, breathing automatically, desperately trying to process the impossible. She returned to the dark living room and sat in the same spot on the sofa. The bright city lights streamed in through the large windows, casting long, ghostly shadows on the white wall. It was then that she distinctly heard the key turning in the front door lock. Michael was coming home. Sarah felt her entire body tense immediately, like a rope stretched to its maximum. Every muscle stiffened. Her heart began to pound wildly. He entered calmly and turned on the bright living room light without warning. He wore exactly the same elegant outfit as the night before at the restaurant. He looked visibly tired, but not emotionally disturbed, not guilty or remorseful, unaffected by the pain he'd caused, just physically tired from a long day. "It's still here," he said with complete indifference, as if he were casually commenting on the weather or the traffic. "Where else would I be?" Sarah replied, her voice hoarse and scratchy from not having said anything at all day. Michael shrugged nonchalantly and placed his jingling keys on the small entryway table, as he had done every day for years. "I honestly thought you might have run off to your parents' house on Long Island, or to a close friend's house to cry and complain." "This is my home, too," Sarah said firmly, getting up from the couch with some difficulty. Her legs were numb from staying in the same position for so long. "For now it is," Michael replied with cutting coldness, taking off his expensive jacket and tossing it carelessly onto the armchair. Sarah felt the deep anger begin to boil dangerously inside her. The unbearable pain was gradually transforming into something else entirely, something stronger and more powerful, something she didn't recognize in herself. "We need to talk seriously now," she said, her voice coming out much firmer and more decisive than she'd expected. "About what exactly? I already said absolutely everything I needed to say yesterday at the restaurant." "No, you didn't tell me everything. You just dropped a nuclear bomb on my entire life and walked away. Now you're going to sit on this couch and give me all the answers I deserve." Michael sighed deeply as if this were a tremendous and unnecessary inconvenience in his important schedule. "Okay, Sarah. Let's talk if it will make you feel better in any way. What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything," she said determinedly, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "I want to know exactly when you coldly decided to use me as a tool. I want to know in detail how you meticulously planned all of this. I want to understand deeply how a normal human being could do something so cruel to another." Michael walked calmly to the elegant bar in the living room and generously poured himself an expensive whiskey. He offered Sarah absolutely nothing. He took a long, appreciative sip before finally answering. "Do you really want to know the full truth? Or would you secretly prefer to continue living comfortably in the fantasy you've created?" "I want the whole truth," Sarah said without hesitation. "All of it. It doesn't matter at all how much it hurts or how much it destroys me." Michael sat comfortably in the armchair, holding his glass of whiskey, completely relaxed, as if they were discussing a common legal case and not the complete destruction of a marriage. "When I met you at that boring corporate event in 2015, I had just been promoted to senior counsel at the firm. It was an absolutely pivotal moment in my career. The obvious and necessary next step was to become a partner. But you need to understand how the firm I work for works." Sarah remained standing, arms still crossed, listening to every word with rapt attention. "The firm is extremely traditional and conservative. The founding partners have very old-fashioned values about family and stability. They deeply value married men, men with suitable wives and structured families, men who represent stability and reliability. Single men are seen as unstable, as potential risks, as people who are not committed enough." "So you decided to get married just to impress your bosses?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly with suppressed anger. "Basically, yes," Michael confirmed without showing any embarrassment or shame. "I urgently needed that perfect professional image. I needed a wife who would make an excellent impression. Someone visibly beautiful and attractive. Someone clearly educated and cultured. Someone from a good family with social connections. Someone who knew how to behave impeccably at important events. You were absolutely perfect for the role." Sarah felt nausea rising in her throat. She held on to the back of the sofa to keep from staggering. "So you strategically chose me as if you were choosing an appropriate outfit for an important job interview?" "Exactly," he replied with brutal sincerity, taking another sip of whiskey. "I researched you extensively before we even spoke for the first time at that event. I already knew all about your respectable family on Long Island. I already knew about your excellent education and your prestigious job. I already knew you had exactly the social profile I desperately needed." Sarah covered her face with her hands, trying to control her ragged breathing. Everything made horribly perfect sense now. The intense, whirlwind romance, the rushed marriage proposal after only a year, the inexplicable rush to make it official. Every detail had been meticulously calculated. "And it worked perfectly," Michael continued, almost with a hint of pride in his voice. "The partners were completely enchanted with you from the first dinner I strategically arranged. You were exactly everything I told them you would be, charming and charismatic, intelligent and articulate, elegant and sophisticated, absolutely perfect for the image I needed to project. What about the whole wedding? The beautiful ceremony? The romantic honeymoon? The emotional vows? Was it all just calculated pretense?" "Absolutely everything without exception," he confirmed coolly without the slightest hesitation. "Every carefully chosen word, every planned romantic gesture, every empty promise. I'm exceptionally good at acting and deceiving, Sarah. I always have been since I was a child." Sarah felt her legs give out completely. She slumped back onto the couch, unable to stand. Tears began streaming down her tired face again. "Ah, you're a monster," she said, her voice breaking painfully. "An absolute monster with no heart or conscience." "I'm just practical and focused," Michael corrected calmly, unfazed in the slightest. "I had very clear and ambitious professional goals. You were simply an extremely efficient means to achieve them. And it worked absolutely perfectly. I quickly became a junior partner in my 3rd year, a full partner in my 5th year. Now I'm recognized as one of the most respected and successful lawyers in all of Chicago. Mission accomplished. How many people live with someone who never truly loved them? How many build entire lives based on lies they'd rather not see? Sarah had all the signs right in front of her for 10 whole years. But the fear of facing the truth was greater than the courage to question it. Now she was paying the price for this willful blindness. So tell me, have you ever ignored important signs in a relationship because you were afraid of the truth? Share your experience in the comments. Sarah wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand and took several deep breaths. She needed to compose herself. She needed to fully understand everything before making any important decisions. Michael was still sitting comfortably in the armchair, sipping his expensive whiskey as if they were having a banal, uninteresting conversation about work. "What about me?" Sarah finally asked, her voice firmer now, despite the crushing pain. "What happens to me now that you no longer need me for your brilliant career?" Michael shrugged with absolute and total indifference. "This is completely up to you, Sarah. You can stay married to me only on paper if you want to keep up social appearances. You can file for divorce if you prefer to move on with your life. I honestly don't care what you decide to do anymore. I've already achieved absolutely everything I needed and wanted. My career is fully established. My professional reputation is impeccable and respected. My position at the firm is secure and safe. You've already completely fulfilled your purpose in my life." Sarah felt something break inside her at that precise moment. It wasn't just her broken heart shattering further. It was something much deeper and more fundamental. It was her last illusion shattering completely. Her last hope dying definitively. She looked at the man sitting across from her. The man she'd shared a bed with for 10 whole years. The man she'd sworn eternal love to in front of God and witnesses. The man who was now a complete and utter stranger. "How can you live with yourself?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about the answer. "How can you look in the mirror every day knowing what you did to me? Knowing that you completely destroyed someone who truly loved you?" Michael took another generous sip of his whiskey before responding with that disturbing calm. "Because I've never fundamentally lied to myself about who I am, Sarah. I know exactly who I am. I know perfectly well what I'm capable of. I have no romantic illusions or naive fantasies about true love and soulmates. I see the world exactly as it is, a place where you use the tools available to you to get what you want. You were an extremely useful and efficient tool. Simple as that." "A tool," Sarah repeated, feeling the word burn on her tongue. "You reduced 10 years of my life, 10 of my best years, to a disposable tool." "It wasn't personal," Michael said, as if that made everything any better or more acceptable. "You were just in the right place at the right time with the right qualities I desperately needed." Sarah stood up from the couch abruptly, her anger finally completely overcoming the crippling pain. "It wasn't personal," she nearly screamed, her voice echoing through the large room. "You used me. You manipulated me. You pretended to love me for a whole decade. You stole the best years of my life, and you say it wasn't personal." Michael remained impassive, completely without emotional reaction. "You're being unnecessarily dramatic. I gave you a comfortable and enviable life, a beautiful house in this expensive neighborhood, designer clothes in a huge closet, trips to exotic places, an unlimited credit card. You had everything any woman could want materially." "Except true love," Sarah screamed, tears flowing freely again. "Except basic respect, except minimal honesty, except being seen as a human being and not a useful object." "Love is overrated," Michael said coldly, finishing his whiskey in one gulp. "It's a fantasy people tell themselves to give meaning to their mediocre lives. I prefer to live in concrete reality." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, really staring, seeing him for the first time without the distorted lenses of blind love and convenient denial. And what she saw was both terrifying and revealing. A man completely empty inside, a man incapable of genuine human connection, A man who saw people as chess pieces in a game, only he was consciously playing. "You need professional help," Sarah finally said, her voice calmer now but firm. "You're a sociopath. You have something deeply wrong with you." Michael laughed, really laughed. It was his first display of any real emotion since arriving home. Sociopath. What a convenient and simplistic diagnosis. "No, Sarah, I'm not mentally ill. I'm just brutally honest about how the world really works. Most people live in total denial. I simply accept reality and work with it strategically. The reality is that you are incapable of love," Sarah said. "Incapable of real empathy. Incapable of genuinely connecting with another human being. That's not strength. It's a serious disability. It's an empty, pathetic life." For the first time, something flashed across Michael's face. It was only a second, a micro-expression Sarah almost missed. Anger, maybe, or discomfort. Something that indicated her words had struck a nerve. "Are we done here?" he asked, getting up from the chair. "No," Sarah said, blocking his path. "We're not done yet. You're going to tell me everything, every detail, every lie, every manipulation. I deserve to know exactly what you did to me." Michael looked at her with growing irritation. "For what? To make you feel worse? To prolong the suffering unnecessarily? So I can finally close this chapter of my life knowing the complete truth," Sarah replied with conviction. "No more doubts, no more questions. No more what-ifs." Michael sighed heavily and sat back down, clearly irritated but willing to continue. "What else do you specifically want to know? Have you ever loved anyone in your life? Really?" "No." The answer came too quickly, without hesitation, without reflection. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Never. Not your parents? Not your friends? No one. Love is a word people use to describe need, attraction, or convenience. I understand the concept intellectually, but feeling it, no, I never have. Then why didn't you tell me this before you married me? Why weren't you honest from the beginning?" Michael looked at her as if she had asked the stupidest question in the world. "Because you would never have married me if I said, 'Hello, Sarah, you seem like a suitable wife for my career advancement. Will you marry me for convenience?' Obviously, I had to play the traditional romance game." "The game," Sarah repeated bitterly. "It was all an elaborate game for you." "Everything in life is a game, Sarah. People who pretend it isn't are just comfortably fooling themselves." Sarah felt clarity dawn amidst the emotional chaos. For the first time since that horrible night at the restaurant, she saw the whole situation with absolute clarity. Michael wasn't just a bad or distant husband. He was fundamentally incapable of being a real partner. She had spent 10 years trying to win the love of someone who simply lacked this basic emotional capacity. It was like trying to get water from a stone. Impossible from the start. "I'm leaving you," Sarah said, the decision forming clearly in her mind for the first time. "I'm going to file for divorce. I'm going to rebuild my life without you." "As you wish," Michael said disinterestedly. "My lawyers will contact yours. We'll do it civilly and efficiently." "Civilized," Sarah repeated with a bitter, humorless laugh. "There's nothing civilized about what you did to me." Michael stood up again, and this time Sarah didn't block his path. "One last thing," she said as he started up the stairs to his room. "You will die alone and empty, with no one who truly cares about you, with no true memories, with no real love, and in the end, your entire brilliant career will mean absolutely nothing, because you've lost the one thing that makes life worth living: genuine human connection." Michael stopped halfway up the stairs. He didn't turn around. He stood there for a long moment in complete silence. "Maybe you're right," he said finally, his voice strangely lower and different. But I've already made my choices, and I don't regret any of them." And then he climbed the rest of the stairs and disappeared into the hallway, leaving Sarah alone in the living room, the wreckage of 10 years scattered around her like sharp shards of glass. But for the first time since that devastating night, Sarah felt something other than pain. She felt determination. She felt strength. She felt the beginnings of a productive anger that would propel her forward instead of keeping her stuck in the past. Sarah didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't because of the crippling pain. It was because of the mental clarity that had finally arrived. She lay awake, making plans, thinking about her next steps, mentally organizing what her life would be like from then on. For the first time in 10 years, she was thinking about herself, her needs, her dreams, not Michael's. By the time the sun rose over the horizon, Sarah had already made several important decisions. The first was to call Linda, her best friend since college. Linda had always been the honest friend, the one who spoke the truths Sarah didn't want to hear. Linda had questioned the marriage from the beginning. She had noticed things Sarah completely ignored. "Sarah, it's 6 in the morning. Is everything okay?" Linda answered with a worried voice. "No, nothing is okay, but it will be," Sarah replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need to see you. Today. Now, if possible." "I'm coming," Linda said without hesitation. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Sarah hung up and went to shower. She stood under the hot water for a long time, letting the steam envelop her tired body. It was as if she were washing 10 years of lies from her skin. When she stepped out of the shower, she looked in the mirror. She still saw her puffy eyes, her tired face, but she also saw something different, a determination that hadn't been there before. She dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, none of the designer clothes Michael bought her for events, nothing that reminded her of him. When she came downstairs, Michael had already left for the office. He didn't even leave a note. He didn't even text. He simply left as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't completely destroyed his wife's life the night before. Linda arrived exactly 30 minutes later. As soon as Sarah opened the door, Linda hugged her tightly. Sarah collapsed in her friend's arms, crying again. But these tears were different. They weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of relief, too. Relief at finally being able to share the burden she'd been carrying alone. They sat in the living room, and Sarah told her everything. Every horrific detail. Every cruel word Michael had said. Every devastating truth that had been revealed. Linda listened silently, holding Sarah's hand, her own tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," Linda said when Sarah finished. "I always knew there was something wrong with him. The way he looked at you, like he was sizing up a piece of property. It wasn't a look of love. It was a look of possession." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sarah asked without accusation, just genuine curiosity. "I tried subtly a few times, but you were so in love, so blind, and I had no concrete proof. It was just intuition. Besides, who listens when they're in love?" Sarah nodded. Linda was right. She wouldn't have listened. She would have defended Michael. She would have made excuses, like she had for 10 whole years. "What are you going to do now?" Linda asked, squeezing Sarah's hand. "I'm going to get divorced. I'm going to move out of this house. I'm going to rebuild my life completely. I'm going to find who I really am without him. You have my full support. You can stay at my house as long as you need. I will help you with everything." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude flood her chest. She wasn't alone. There were people who truly cared about her. People who truly loved her. Not the way Michael pretended to. In the following days, Sarah took action. First, she contacted a divorce lawyer, a strong and experienced woman named Patricia, who had previously dealt with cases of manipulative marriages. Patricia listened to Sarah's story and immediately began preparing the necessary documents. "Do you have any proof of his manipulation?" Patricia asked. "Just my word against his," Sarah replied. "But it doesn't matter. I don't want revenge. I just want my freedom." "I understand. Let's do this cleanly and efficiently. He has considerable assets. You are entitled to half." Sarah thought for a moment. She could fight for the money. She could make the divorce a long, painful battle. But she no longer wanted anything to tie her to Michael, not even his money. "I just want enough to start over. I don't want to fight. I want to move on as quickly as possible." Patricia nodded respectfully. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a woman choose peace of mind over a financial struggle. Sarah also started therapy. She found a psychologist who specialized in abusive relationships and emotional manipulation. The first few sessions were difficult. Sarah had to confront painful truths about herself, about how she ignored the signs, about how she lost herself in the relationship, about how she let her identity be consumed by her identity as Michael's wife. "You were a victim of emotional abuse," the psychologist said in one session. "Manipulation isn't just physical. Michael used you. He controlled you. He made you question your own perception of reality. That's gaslighting. That's abuse." Hearing those words was liberating in a strange way. Sarah wasn't weak. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't pathetic. She was the victim of a calculating and unscrupulous person. And now she was choosing to heal. 2 weeks after that night at the restaurant, Sarah packed her things. She didn't take much, just clothes, a few books, family photos. She left everything Michael had bought her, all the expensive jewelry, all the designer dresses, all the fake memories. She wanted to start completely from scratch. When Michael arrived home that day, he found the house empty. Sarah had left. She left only a short letter on the kitchen table. "Michael, I'm leaving. The divorce papers will be served soon. Don't try to contact me. There's nothing more to talk about. You took 10 years of my life. You won't get another second. Good luck with your empty life, Sarah." 6 months had passed since Sarah left that house. 6 months of painful but necessary rebuilding. She was temporarily living with Linda while she looked for her own apartment. A small, cozy place that would truly be hers. Not a mansion bought with dirty money, but an honest space where she could breathe freely. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. Michael didn't fight. He didn't contest. He signed the papers without drama because Sarah didn't ask for much. She accepted just enough to stabilize herself. A fair amount, but not greedy. She didn't want anything that would tie her to him any longer than necessary. She wanted to close that chapter completely. Sarah went back to work. She quit her old job, where everyone knew Michael, and started at a new digital marketing company. A young, dynamic environment where no one knew her past, where she could just be Sarah, not Michael's wife, just Sarah. The first few months were extremely difficult. She would wake up some nights with a tight chest, remembering some tainted memory. There were days when she doubted everything. Days when she wondered if she had made the right choice. Days when the loneliness seemed unbearable. But therapy helped immensely. Week by week, Sarah peeled back the layers of manipulation. She found her voice again. She learned to trust herself. Linda was instrumental in this process. On difficult nights, she would sit with Sarah in the living room and they would talk for hours. They remembered who Sarah was before Michael. The vibrant, dreamy woman, full of plans and energy. The woman who had gradually lost herself over 10 years. The woman who was finally rising from the ashes. "You look different," Linda said one night as they sipped wine on the porch. "There's a light in your eyes I haven't seen in years." Sarah smiled. It was true. She could feel this change happening inside. It was painful, like breaking bones to grow. But it was real. It was genuine. It was hers. Sarah also reconnected with old friends she'd lost touch with during her marriage. Michael always found excuses for her not to go out. He always had important events. He always needed her at home. She now realized how systematically she'd been isolated, how Michael had slowly cut off her connections. But now she was rebuilding those bridges. She started doing things she'd abandoned. She went back to the painting classes she'd loved in college. She started running in the park every morning. She read books Michael considered a waste of time. She watched silly, romantic movies he despised. She ate pizza in bed. She danced alone in the living room. She did all the little things that made her happy, but had left behind. One day, Sarah was at the supermarket buying ingredients to make lasagna. She was in the pasta aisle when she accidentally bumped into someone. "Sorry," she said automatically, turning to see who it was. He was a man in his 40s, tall, with a kind smile and warm brown eyes. He was holding a basket of random bachelor's items. "No problem," he replied, smiling. "I was distracted by what tomato sauce to buy. There are so many options." Sarah laughed. It was a genuine laugh, light, natural. "The secret is to make your own," she said. "But if you're going to buy it, this one is the best." She pointed to a specific brand. The man picked it up and put it in the basket. "Thanks for the tip. I'm terrible in the kitchen. Any help is welcome." They talked for a few minutes right there in the supermarket aisle. His name was David. He was a history professor at the local university. He was also recently divorced. He was relearning how to live alone. Something about the conversation was easy, comfortable. No pressure, no expectations. "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime," David suggested shyly. "If you want, sure. No strings attached. Just talk." Sarah hesitated for a second. Her first instinct was to refuse. She was still healing. She was still finding herself. But then she looked at David again, at his honest smile, at his kind eyes, and she thought, why not? It didn't have to be anything serious. It didn't have to be a relationship. Just coffee. Just a conversation. "I would love to," she replied, surprising herself. They exchanged numbers. David texted the next day. They planned to meet for coffee that weekend. Sarah was nervous, but also excited. It was a strange, new feeling. It wasn't the anxious nervousness she'd felt with Michael. It was something lighter, more hopeful. The coffee was wonderful. They talked for 3 hours without realizing the time passed. David talked about his passion for history, about his students, about his amicable divorce from a woman who realized they wanted different things in life. Sarah talked about her new job, about painting, about starting over. She didn't mention details about Michael. She wasn't ready yet. "You have incredible energy," David said at the end. "It's rare to find someone so genuine." Genuine. That word touched Sarah deeply. She had spent 10 years being molded into something she wasn't. Now she was finally being genuine again. They saw each other a few more times over the next few weeks. Always casual, always light. Sarah wasn't ready for a serious relationship. She made that clear from the start. David understood and respected it completely. He was also healing from his own divorce. They became friends first, and maybe, in time, it could become something more, or maybe not. And that was okay. Sarah realized something important. She didn't need a man to complete herself. She didn't need external validation to feel valuable. She was complete on her own, whole on her own. Anyone who entered her life now would be a compliment, not a necessity. Never again would they be a necessity. A year had passed since that devastating night at the restaurant. Sarah had been completely transformed, not physically, but deeply, internally. She had found her own apartment, small but full of light. Decorated with her own choices, every object told her true story, not someone else's. She thrived in her new job and was quickly promoted. Her colleagues admired her genuine dedication. Sarah rediscovered the passion for life she thought she had lost forever. The biggest lesson: you can't make someone truly love you, but you can always choose yourself. You can rebuild completely. You can rise from the ashes. What about you? Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever had to start over after discovering a painful truth? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments. And if this story touched you in any way, like the video, subscribe to the channel using the subscribe button or the QR code that appears on your screen, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss more moving stories like this.